They handed her the divorce papers in the living room of the house she had paid to furnish. Not in a lawyer's office, not through certified mail. In the living room on a Sunday afternoon, while his mother sat on the cream sofa that Maren had chosen herself, watching with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting a long time for it to finally go her way. Harlan Voss stood near the fireplace. His mistress, a woman named Camille, who worked in his firm's marketing department and wore perfume that arrived in a room before she did, sat in the armchair closest to the door, as if she already knew the layout, as if she had rehearsed this. Maren Ashby Voss, 38-year-old senior partner at Caldwell & Horn Architecture, set down her coffee cup. She looked at the envelope. She said nothing. That silence, her silence, was the thing none of them would understand until much later. Harlan had married Maren 11 years ago, when the Voss family name still meant something in Alderton, Georgia. His father, the late Gerald Voss, had built Voss Construction and Development into a regional institution over 40 years. Harlan had inherited the company at 41 with every advantage in the world and the vague intention of expanding it. He had not expanded it. He had managed to hold it approximately in place while quietly eroding its foundations, the way termites work, invisibly, steadily, and until the day the floor gives out. Maren had known this. She had watched the quarterly reports, had listened to him dismiss her concerns over dinner, had watched his mother Eleanor Voss, 67, former socialite and full-time arbiter of the Voss family's social standing, redirect every conversation toward how much Maren did not fit in. Eleanor had wanted Harlan to marry Camille Beaumont, the daughter of Douglas Beaumont, who owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 counties and who golfed with the right people. Camille had grown up in the same church as the Voss family. She knew which fork to use at the Alderton Country Club. She laughed at the right moments and stayed quiet at the right ones. Maren had grown up in Raleigh, the daughter of a structural engineer father and a mother who taught high school chemistry. She had attended North Carolina State on a scholarship, then gone north for her master's. She spoke her mind. She questioned things. She had once, at an Easter dinner, gently corrected Eleanor's claim that a local building had been designed by a famous architect. It hadn't been, and Maren had known this because she had researched the building herself, years earlier, for a graduate seminar. Eleanor Voss had never forgiven her for that. For 11 years, Maren had tried. She had attended the dinners and the charity events and the Sunday lunches. She had listened to Eleanor compliment Camille's new haircut while looking directly at Maren's. She had watched Harlan fail to say a word in her defense so many times that she eventually stopped expecting it. She had done something else instead. The thing about being dismissed is that it gives you a great deal of uninterrupted time to work. Maren had spent the better part of 4 years building something. Not out of spite, not in the beginning. It had started as a professional opportunity she recognized before anyone else did. But she'd be lying if she said the way the Voss family treated her hadn't clarified something in her, hadn't made her more careful, more deliberate, more certain that she needed to be standing on something entirely her own. She was an architect. She had designed buildings, hospitals, municipal centers, a performing arts space in Savannah that had won a regional award 3 years running. She understood how structures worked. She understood load-bearing elements. She understood what happened when the foundation was compromised and nobody had bothered to look. In her professional capacity, in the years before and during her marriage, she had built a subsidiary holding company called Ashby Design Partners. She had kept her maiden name in the title deliberately, though no one in the Voss family had ever asked about it. The company had started as a pass-through for her freelance architectural contracts. Over time, as her reputation grew, it became something more. A small but serious real estate development entity that partnered with municipalities and private developers to finance and design mid-size civic and commercial buildings. She had structured it carefully. Her attorney, a meticulous woman named Sandra Okafor, who had advised Maren since her early career, had helped her keep the business interests clean and separate from marital assets from the very beginning. Not because Maren had planned for the marriage to fail, but because her father had taught her, when she was 17, and watching him review blueprints at the kitchen table, that you always account for the load you can't see. Voss Construction's financial deterioration had become visible to Maren about 3 years into her marriage, when she noticed certain patterns in conversations Harlan had with his CFO that stopped whenever she entered the room. She didn't press, she just paid attention. By year 6, she had a fairly complete picture of the damage, overextended contracts, a commercial development in North Georgia that had gone sideways, debt restructured twice with terms that were increasingly punishing. By year 8, she had quietly begun the process of positioning Ashby Design Partners to respond to what she anticipated was coming. not to hurt anyone, to be ready. The divorce papers were dated 6 weeks before the Sunday they handed them to her. Maren had already known, not because she had hired someone to follow Harlan. She hadn't needed to. She had simply noticed the pattern of his absence. The way his phone was always face down now. The way he said Camille's name 3 times in 1 month, in contexts where it didn't need to be said. She had learned in 11 years with this family to read what was happening from what was being left out. She signed where she was asked to sign. She was calm. Eleanor watched her with an expression that seemed to expect more. Tears, perhaps, or an argument. Some proof that Maren was as fragile as Eleanor had always believed her to be. Maren handed the papers back to Harlan's attorney, who had driven out from Atlanta for the occasion. She picked up her coffee cup. She said, "I'll have Sandra reach out to confirm the asset division terms," and she left the room. That was the last time she was in that house. The Alderton Civic Center project had been announced by the City Council 4 months earlier. It was the largest municipal development project in the county's history. $112 million, a new mixed-use civic complex meant to anchor the downtown revitalization that city planners had been discussing cautiously for the better part of a decade. Voss Construction had bid on the project. It was, Harlan had told anyone who would listen at the country club, exactly the kind of contract that would restore the Voss name to the prominence his father had achieved. Eleanor had held a dinner in anticipation of the announcement. She had placed Camille at Harlan's right hand. There were 4 firms that submitted formal bids. Ashby Design Partners submitted a 5th. Maren had not publicized her involvement. The bid was submitted under the company's legal name, prepared by her team, reviewed by Sandra, delivered on time and in full compliance with every municipal requirement. The proposal included a full architectural design plan, a phased construction timeline, a detailed financing structure, and a community engagement component that the city's project manager would later describe in a memo that became part of the public record as the most comprehensive response to the project brief we received. She had not told Harlan. She had not told Eleanor. She had not told anyone in Alderton except Sandra and her lead project manager, a quiet and capable man named Felix, who had worked with her for 6 years and who understood without being told that discretion was part of his job. The City Council reviewed the bids over 11 weeks. They asked 2 firms to return for second presentations. Ashby Design Partners was one of them. Maren presented in a conference room at Alderton City Hall, 12 days after her divorce was finalized. She wore a dark gray suit. She had prepared for every question she was asked, and several she wasn't. She left the building at 6 in the evening and drove home to the apartment she had rented in Midtown Savannah, where she was now living, and she ate dinner alone and called her mother. The award announcement came 3 weeks later. Harlan heard about it from his attorney, who had seen the press release on the city's website. The attorney called on a Thursday morning. Harlan was at the office. The call lasted 4 minutes. Harlan sat at his desk for a long time after it ended. Ashby Design Partners had been awarded the Alderton Civic Center contract. Full scope, construction management included, $112 million. The name took him a moment. It was familiar. It was the name of the company on certain documents he had seen over the years. Documents related to Maren's professional work that he had never paid close attention to, because he had never considered her professional work particularly relevant. He had thought of it as her consulting work, her side projects, the architectural hobby she maintained alongside his actual career. He called his mother first, then he called his own attorney, then he called Sandra Okafor's office, was told that Sandra was unavailable, and left a message that Sandra later described to Maren as agitated. Eleanor Voss drove to Harlan's office that afternoon. She was wearing pearls, which she always wore when she needed to feel in command of a situation. She sat across from her son and told him there had to be a mistake, that the bid must have been submitted without Maren's knowledge, that someone must have used her name, that there was some explanation that did not require accepting that Maren Ashby had walked away from this family and immediately won the largest construction contract in Alderton's history. Harlan did not tell his mother what he was actually thinking. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had with Maren 4 years ago on a Sunday morning in the kitchen of the house they shared. He'd been reading the paper, and she had been at the table with her laptop and a coffee, reviewing something. He had asked, not really paying attention, what she was working on. She had said, a municipal project proposal. He had nodded and turned a page. He had not asked which municipality. He had not asked anything else. He thought about that now. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Alderton Civic Center was held on a bright Tuesday in October. The mayor was there. The city council was there. Several members of the local press attended, along with representatives from the county's planning department and 2 state senators who had backed the project's federal funding component. Maren Ashby Voss. She had resumed using Ashby professionally, though her legal name still carried the Voss, stood at the podium and spoke for 7 minutes about design philosophy, community infrastructure, and what it meant to build something that was meant to last. She did not speak about her personal life. She did not mention her former husband or his family. She did not use the occasion for anything other than what it was. She did her job. Afterward, the mayor shook her hand and said, "Mrs. Ashby, this project is going to change what this city looks like for the next 50 years. Maren thanked him. She meant it. Harlan had driven past the groundbreaking. He had not stopped. He had seen the tent from the road, the cluster of people in hard hats, the banner with the Ashby Design Partners logo. He had kept driving. His firm had not recovered from the failed North Georgia development. The Civic Center contract, which he had assumed was his, had been the plan. The financial lifeline that would have allowed him to restructure the company's debt on better terms, to extend the runway long enough to stabilize. Without it, the timeline compressed. His CFO resigned in February. The bank called in a margin on a construction loan in March. By April, Harlan had retained a restructuring attorney. Camille left in May. This was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention, though Harlan appeared to find it surprising. She moved back to her father's house in Beaumont County and did not respond to his calls, which was, his attorney privately thought, the most sensible decision she had made in the entire situation. Eleanor came to understand over the course of that year what had actually happened. It did not come to her all at once. It came in pieces, in the architecture trade publication that ran a profile of Maren in the spring. In the city council minutes, she read online at 2 in the morning in a way she would not have admitted to anyone. In the conversation she had with Douglas Beaumont at a charity luncheon, where he mentioned, with a certain careful blankness, that he'd heard Maren Ashby was doing very well. Eleanor had spent 11 years making Maren feel like a guest in her own marriage. She had dismissed her intelligence, questioned her background, undermined her confidence, in ways that were small enough to be deniable, but consistent enough to be intentional. She had wanted her son to see what she saw, a woman who didn't belong, who would always be a slight embarrassment, who should have been grateful for the Voss name and never seemed to be. What Eleanor had never accounted for was that Maren was not there for the Voss name. She had never been there for the Voss name. She had been there for Harlan, and when Harlan made clear that his mother's approval mattered more than his wife's dignity, Maren had simply, quietly, without announcement, redirected her energy toward the things that were actually hers. The architecture, the company, the work, the load-bearing elements. Sandra Okafor called Maren on a Thursday afternoon in early June to let her know that Harlan's restructuring team had reached out about the possibility of a Voss construction subsidiary contract under the Civic Center project, a subcontracting relationship. Harlan's firm doing certain site work under Ashby Design Partners' overall management. Maren was in her office in Savannah. She was reviewing specifications for the project. She had a coffee on the desk, and the window was open, and she could hear the street below. She was quiet for a moment. "What are the terms they're proposing?" she asked. Sandra read them out. Maren listened to every number. She did not interrupt. When Sandra finished, Maren said, "Counter with standard subcontractor terms. No exceptions. If they meet the terms and their bonding is current, they can bid. If they can't meet the terms, they don't bid. Same as anyone else." Sandra said, "Same as anyone else, same as anyone else," Maren said. She hung up the phone. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the street and thought about something her father used to say when she was a teenager and impatient, and wanted to know why it took so long for things to be built correctly. He had told her, "Because the foundation has to be right before anything else can go up. If the foundation is right, you can build anything you want. If it isn't, it doesn't matter how beautiful the rest is, it will come down." She had designed Ashby Design Partners the way her father had taught her to design anything. The foundation was right. The Civic Center opened 22 months later in August. The building was a clean, light-filled structure with a public plaza, an indoor market hall, a branch of the county library, and a small performance space that could seat 300. The Savannah Morning News ran a photo of Maren at the ribbon cutting, standing in bright summer light with the building behind her, looking like exactly what she was. A woman who had built something that would be there long after the people who had underestimated her were gone. She had not invited Harlan to the opening. She had not excluded him either. The event was public. The mayor spoke. A local high school choir performed. A councilwoman who had championed the project from the beginning cried a little when she cut the ribbon, which made several people in the crowd cry too, in the way that it happens sometimes when something has taken a long time and finally exists. Maren stood in the lobby afterward, surrounded by her team, Felix, and the project managers, and the engineers, and the young associate who had done most of the structural calculations, and who had, in the way of young people who were very good at things, not yet fully understood how good she was. Maren made a point of saying her name in every conversation she had that afternoon. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the catering staff was packing up, she walked through the building alone, through the library wing, through the market hall with its high ceilings and northern light, into the performance space, which smelled like new wood and clean concrete. She sat in one of the center seats. She looked at the empty stage. She sat there for a long time. She was not thinking about Harlan. She was not thinking about Eleanor. She was not thinking about the 11 years or the Sunday afternoon with the divorce papers, or the look on Eleanor's face, or the perfume that had arrived before Camille did. She was thinking about what came next. She had 3 proposals in development: a school renovation in coastal Georgia, a mixed-use project in Columbia, South Carolina, a preliminary conversation with a developer in Charlotte that had the shape of something genuinely interesting if the financing came together. She pulled out her phone. She had a message from Sandra, and one from Felix, and one from her mother, who had driven up for the opening and was now back at the hotel and wanted to know if Maren was hungry. She was. She sent her mother a text, stood up, and walked back through the performance space, through the market hall, through the lobby, where the last of the staff were turning off the display lights. She was the last one to leave. She stood in the plaza for a moment before walking to her car. The August heat had settled into the evening air, that particular quality of southern summer that never fully releases even after the sun goes down. The building was lit from within. She had specified the lighting herself, had gone back and forth with the electrical engineer about the color temperature, had wanted something warm enough to feel inhabited even when it was empty. It looked exactly the way she had drawn it 4 years ago in the early plans that she had drafted alone at her kitchen table while Harlan watched television in the next room and Eleanor's opinion of her sat somewhere in the house, like a piece of furniture no one had agreed to buy. She walked to her car. She drove to the restaurant where her mother was waiting. The name on the building said Alderton Civic Center. Below that, in smaller letters, the way these things are typically recorded, Ashby Design Partners, lead architect and development manager. Not the Voss name, not anyone else's name, hers.